Midway through the development of 12 Tales Conker 64, the Rare developers arrived at the decision that they were not going to inspire sales with a cute and cuddly platform adventure along the lines of their 1998 smash hit Banjo-Kazooie. They instead decided to drastically change course and reimagine their hero as a jaded, cynical, foul-mouthed booze fiend, and the cast of supporting characters as crass, violent, sexually explicit, or all of the above. Despite mediocre sales, mostly due to being released at the tail end of the N64's life cycle, Conker's Bad Fur Day did gain notoriety for its surprising juxtaposition between the googly-eyed characters that were a staple of other Rare platforms of the time, and the game's overtly adult content, especially on the N64, which had gained a reputation for family-friendly games. The humour of Conker's Bad Fur Day is what sticks in most people's minds when they recall the game, with iconic moments like the Great Mighty Pooh living long in the memory. Until recently I hadn't played the game in 15 plus years, but I still remembered the lyrics to his song off by heart. But something else struck me while playing through the game, a burning question that I've given quite a bit of thought since. Is the game actually funny? And if it isn't funny now, was it ever? By way of a content warning, this video will contain discussion of misogyny, suicide and ableist slurs. It's also probably a good time to say that if you're the sort of person who agrees with statements like "you can't say anything nowadays" or "it's political correctness gone mad," or thinks the fact that I even gave a content warning at all makes me a snowflake or something, then this probably won't be for you. In fact, I firstly want to preempt the predictable response that it isn't fair to judge older pieces of media by today's standards. I'm not going to say I didn't find most of Conker pretty hilarious in 2001 upon release. I definitely did. But I was 14, and South Park, which Conker director Chris Seaver has openly stated was a major influence, was a cultural juggernaut at the time. Although that show has always fancied itself a satire, like Conker, its popularity was in no small part due to how profane and crass it was, which felt really new at the time. I remember that feeling like I was getting away with something while watching South Park in my early teens, and that slightly rebellious feeling carried over into playing Conker. But the standards of the time argument doesn't hold up for either South Park or Conker. Both deliberately set out to be shocking, and it was only by crossing cultural boundaries that they achieved this. So if you are tempted to make that argument, just bear in mind that it was explicitly Seaver and his team's intention to flout the sensibilities of the time. It wasn't that those sensibilities did not exist or were not widespread. And in case it needs saying, there are games I find genuinely funny. Grim Fandango is absolutely hilarious and one of my favourite games ever, and even Rare's own Banjo-Kazooie has humorous moments that add to the atmosphere of the game. So let's take a look at the types of humour Conker uses and how it uses them. The humour in Conker's Bad Fur Day broadly falls into one of three categories, sometimes achieving more than one of these simultaneously. Gross out humour, shit, farts, blood, gore, parodies and references to TV shows or movies, and gratuitous language. The weird thing is, and appreciating that humour is extremely subjective, the thing that has held up by far the best for me in the intervening 20 years since Conker's release is the first. Are fart and poo jokes subtle or clever? No, of course not. But they are funny. There's a definite puerile quality to the Great Mighty Pooh, a raptor taking a bite out of a big caveman's bum, or seeing cute little squirrels get massacred by machine guns that you'll probably still find funny if it amused you in 2001. And who's to argue? There's even part of the game's soundtrack that liberally uses fart noises to construct a jazz tune as you work your way around Pooh Mountain, giving new meaning to the term scatting. There's something about the audacity of it that makes it funny, to me at least. At the very least, fart and poo jokes and excessive amounts of gore are as funny today as they were at the time of the game's release, and haven't significantly depreciated in value since. Parodies, on the other hand, are almost inherently doomed to get less funny over time as they become less culturally relevant. The popularity of the subject matter being parodied is crucial to the parody itself. In the 2 years following Titanic's release, during the inevitable post-Oscars backlash where everyone decided they hated the film after seeing it in cinemas 3 times each, you couldn't move for parodies. In fact, it's surprising that Conker avoids this, as Titanic remained fertile ground for years to come. But it does riff on just about every other film available, from older works like A Clockwork Orange, to extremely contemporary movies released during Conker's development, most notably Saving Private Ryan and The Matrix. A great parody usually has something to say about the source material, poking fun at perceived failings, albeit often in a loving manner. Is it fair to expect Conker to have some meaningful message about The Matrix? Perhaps not, but what's the joke in this scene? The bullet time mechanic is quite a fun section to play, but is the joke just that a squirrel is firing guns and dressed as Neo? Conker came out the same year as Shrek, which was the absolute pinnacle for this trend of winking at the audience by inserting movie references seemingly at random with very little to say about them. That too had a Matrix reference, which... okay? What's the point of this other than to make you feel like that Leo DiCaprio meme pointing in recognition? After a while, my feeling was that playing Conker was a bit like watching one of those lamentable Not Another movies, just shoving famous things in front of you and that being the joke in its entirety. South Park have done plenty of parodies in their time, and I can think of a couple of them that have some kind of point to make about the subject matter being referenced. This lampoon of the 2004 film The Day After Tomorrow takes aim at the junk science in the film and skewers it effectively.
It's coming! Here comes global warming! We did it, lizard!
With time having passed, references to these other works of media have lost what impact they ever had, but again, I'm not sure they ever had that much bite. I wouldn't say it's entirely unfunny having a cyborg hay bale in reference to Terminator, but it's not exactly who's on first, is it? The last of the categories I mentioned earlier is where Conker really pushed the envelope the most. Like I said at the start, this kind of satire can't have its cake and eat it, being deliberately provocative and expecting not to be called out on some things that in my view are egregious. At the very least, and this applies more broadly to comedy than just this game or genre, I think we should be asking what the joke is and whose expense it's at. In the Barn Boys section of the game, there are two characters that you meet within minutes of one another who appear to be having problems relating to their spouses. Is it really necessary to have them both refer to their female significant others as fat fucking bitches? Again, what is the joke? If someone wants to tell me what it is about this that's funny, I'd genuinely be interested to know. Once the humour value of googly-eyed characters swearing wears off, what are these scenes left with? Can you really say you're laughing at anything other than the misogyny itself? The Panther King's chief scientist, who appears in several cutscenes throughout the game and appears not to have the use of his legs, is named Professor von Cripplespack, a portmanteau of cripple and spacker, slang terms for physical and mental disability that are certainly now, and even at the time, were considered inappropriate. Chris Seaver was 32 years old when Conker was released. Was he really not beyond making funny character names using this method? Does naming the character like this improve the game in any way? If your aim is just to aggressively offend, which was indeed the case, I guess it does achieve that. But again, you have to ask yourself, what is it you're laughing at? The worst scene of all for me is here, where two characters tell another one that he's incompetent and bully him into hanging himself for their own amusement, which he attempts to do. This is a really flippant approach to a very serious topic, and while I'm obviously not laying the blame solely at Chris Seaver's door, it's possible to see that attitude reflected in various areas of discourse nowadays, not least online players casually telling opponents and or teammates to kill themselves during games. And maybe there is something kind of absurd about taking a straight-laced stance when we're discussing cartoon paint pots and a pitchfork in this irreverent game, but again, my question is this necessary? Is it funny? Do I really need to explain why imagery like this is actually quite disturbing for a game that may have had an adult age rating, but was pretty obviously designed for a demographic that includes teenagers? There's a rule that comedy should always be punching upwards, taking aim at the more powerful. When your humour is your male characters referring to female ones as fat fucking bitches, or using ableist slurs to name your comedy character, can you really claim that's what you're doing? I often hear people say you couldn't make Conker today, and they're probably right. I just think that's probably for the best without quite significant changes. Then again, Rare Replay was released with Conker included as recently as 2015, so who knows? I know Chris Seaver has planned a game that was indicated to be a spiritual successor to Conker, in which he promised to take aim at the games industry, so fasten your seatbelts if that ever makes it to release. In the meantime, I think it behooves us all to continue to question the media we consume and criticise it where appropriate. Not only do I not think Conker's Bad Fur Day deserves its reputation as one of the funniest ever made, I don't think the majority of it was funny in its own time. For what it's worth, I've not been able to find any indication that Chris Seaver has given much thought to these jokes in recent times. A series of videos on YouTube from 2013 in which he plays through the game while providing commentary doesn't give any indication that he regrets any of the content. I'd genuinely be interested to get his take on the scenes I highlighted in this video and find out if he thinks they are still funny and where he thinks the humour is derived from. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments, or join me in the Now and Then 64 chat on Twitch, and let's talk it through.